Would you stop for a dog staring through a bakery window, nose pressed to the glass, eyes fixed, not on the bread, but on something deeper? Something almost forgotten hope, perhaps, or the scent of a life you once knew, if only for a few fleeting days when warmth had a name and hunger wasn't a constant ache. Now, imagine walking by that dog every morning on your way to work, coffee in hand, earbuds in, and never noticing how still he sat, how he never barked, never begged, only watched, as if the window itself told him stories or maybe held memories. Or maybe he just liked the way the light hit the sourdough around noon when the sun peeked through the Manhattan brownstones and reflected off the bakery glass like gold. But this isn't just about a dog, and this isn't just about hunger. This is about how something forgotten changed everything. It started, as most stories do, with someone not looking for anything. Someone with a routine. Someone who barely made eye contact with her own reflection anymore. Her name was Riley, 34. Lived on the 4th floor above the hardware store, across the street. Worked at a local publishing house as an editorial assistant, even though her dream was to write children's books, kind with watercolor illustrations and gentle rhymes that made kids giggle, but dreams, like rent checks, were pushed aside for more practical things like deadlines and emails and the quiet ache of loneliness that seeps in when a city is too loud to hear your own thoughts. Riley wasn't unhappy, not really, but she wasn't alive either, not in the way she used to be before the world became too complicated and friends. Drifted in love never stayed, and her mom stopped calling as much because she said Riley always sounded tired. And maybe she was. Tired of the news, tired of noise, tired of pretending she was okay when she wasn't. Every morning she passed that same bakery on her walk to the subway. The same curved glass cases filled with artisan loaves she couldn't afford, and every morning she passed him the golden retriever with fur like burnt caramel and eyes that didn't just beg. They remembered she first noticed him because he didn't move, not like other strays who darted at noise or chased crumbs or barked for scraps. He just sat perfectly still, like a statue made of fur and forgotten dreams. And something about that shook her a little. Not enough to stop, not at first, but enough to glance back, just once. That was 3 weeks ago. And now, every day, she watched him watching the bread. And for some reason, she started walking slower near that window. Sometimes standing still, just long enough to see if he'd notice her too, but he never turned, never begged, never followed. Until one rainy Thursday, when the streets were slick and the air smelled like old coffee grounds, she found herself running late, hair dripping, umbrella snapped by the wind. And there he was, drenched, shaking, but still sitting, still watching that same sourdough loaf. Like it held the answer to something sacred, and that day, she stopped. Really stopped, looked down, eyes locking for the first time, and she said out loud, even though no one else was around, "You really like bread, huh?" And he blinked, slowly, then looked back at the loaf, and she laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it felt real, and in that second, something broke open in her chest. Something warm and aching and human. She stepped inside the bakery. Heart pounding like she was doing something illegal. Bought a single slice of day-old baguette from the unsold bin. Stepped back outside and knelt down, holding it out with shaky hands. "For you," she whispered. And instead of lunging, the dog stood, walked forward slowly, politely, took it gently from her fingers, and sat back down, chewing like it was the first meal he'd had in weeks. And maybe it was, or maybe he just liked the way bread tasted when it came from kindness instead of trash. Riley stood there a while, longer than she meant to, missing her train, her meeting, her coffee run. But it didn't matter. Something had shifted, and she knew it that night. She dreamed of a dog walking into a bakery and choosing the softest loaf, then curling up under the display counter like he belonged there. The next morning, she brought him a half croissant and a thermos of warm chicken broth poured into a Tupperware lid. And he wagged his tail once, just once, and that was all it took. From that day on, it became their ritual. Riley and the dog who never barked, sharing quiet mornings on the sidewalk while the city rushed past them like they didn't exist. And every day, she talked to him about deadlines. about heartbreak, about her mom, about the dream she kept locked in a Google Doc named Someday. And though he never answered, he listened in that deep way dogs do, as if their silence contains all the wisdom you've ever needed. And she started writing again. Just little things, short poems on receipts, story ideas in the margins of grocery lists. The dog, she started calling him Crumbs, became more than a stray. Became a chapter, maybe even a beginning, and it would have stayed that simple if not for the morning she showed up and he wasn't there. No golden fur, no sad eyes, no tail wag, just an empty patch of sidewalk and a bakery window that suddenly looked colder. Riley waited an hour, walking circles, asking nearby shopkeepers. No one had seen him. Not that day, not ever, and panic bloomed in her chest like wildfire, because it's one thing to care quietly, from a distance, but it's another thing too. Realize too late that something became yours without asking, and just like that, Crumbs was gone, vanished into the city like a shadow before sunrise. And Riley, for the first time in years, cried in public, not because she lost a dog, but because she lost a part of herself she never knew she'd given him, and she didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning. Because somewhere, not too far away, Crumbs was doing something no one expected. Something no one believed a dog could do. Something that would make strangers cry and neighbors stare and a city stop to ask, did that really just happen? But to tell that part, we have to go back to the alley behind the bakery, to the scent Crumbs followed, to the heartbeat he heard in the dark. The rain had softened into mist when Crumbs turned away from the bakery that morning, his paw pads wet against the cold sidewalk. Each step slow and deliberate, not because he was weak, but because he had heard something the night before, a sound. So faint, it was barely there, a sound no one else could have heard. Tucked beneath the low hum of traffic and the creak of old fire escapes and the distant wail of a siren. A sound like a heartbeat where there shouldn't have been one. Echoing from a place he hadn't gone in weeks, the alley behind the bakery, narrow and littered with cardboard, old plastic bins, rusted lids, a place where wind howled between. The bricks and shadows stayed longer than they should. And Crumbs didn't know why he turned that morning, didn't question the pull in his chest. The sharp tug that told him something was wrong, something was waiting, something small, forgotten and afraid. The world moved around him, boots splashing, car horns blaring. Caw! He kept his head low and his steps quiet, ducking between garbage, bags and soggy pizza boxes, until he reached it, the broken pallet behind the dumpster. The one with a plastic bag caught in its nails fluttering like a flag. And beneath it, curled so tight she was almost invisible, was a kitten, tiny, soaked, shaking, barely bigger than Crumbs' own paw. Her fur matted with grime, eyes glassy with confusion, mewing so softly it sounded like breathing, and in that moment Crumbs didn't hesitate. Didn't wait for someone else to fix it. He nudged the kitten gently with his nose, then lay beside her, wrapping his body around her like a shield. The cold of the concrete seeping into his bones, but he didn't move, not for hours. It's not until the alley warmed with light and footsteps approached, and a man, the baker's son, came to take out the trash. The golden retriever curled around the kitten like a guardian angel with fur. Hey, buddy, what are you doing back here? The man whispered, kneeling slowly, eyes wide with disbelief. Crumbs lifted his head just a little, just enough to meet the man's eyes, and something in that gaze made the man drop his trash bags and pull out his phone, dialing someone, muttering things like, "You're not going to believe this," and "Yeah, I think they need help," and "No, I'm serious. You have to come now." Within minutes, the alley filled with warmth. Not sunlight, but the warmth that comes from care, from hands that hold instead of push, from voices that tremble when they ask, "Is she okay?" And Crumbs didn't move, not even when they gently lifted the kitten and wrapped her in a towel. Not even when someone brought a blanket just for him. He stayed, like he needed to make sure. Like he wouldn't leave until she was safe, and they let him, because something about him felt sacred. Like he belonged to everyone, and no one all at once. Riley was still searching blocks away. Frantic, asking strangers, checking under benches and behind stoops, her heart cracking with every empty alley. not knowing that Crumbs had already saved a life that morning, that his quiet devotion had stirred something in the people who found him, 'cause, by noon, a photo had gone viral. The dog and the kitten curled together like a painting, like something too pure for the grime around them. Posted by the baker's son with the caption, "He brought her back from the edge." Whoever this dog belongs to, he's not just a stray, he's a miracle. The photo spread like fire in a dry forest, shared by dog lovers, rescue groups, influencers who cried while writing captions. Hashtags poured in, hashtag Crumbs the hero, hashtag not just a stray, hashtag guardian dog, and by evening, news vans were circling the block, bakery sales doubled by customers hoping to see him. But Crumbs, he was gone again. Not hiding, not running, just quietly walking the city like he always had. Following his instinct, drawn not by noise but by silence, by spaces where something was missing. And as the kitten recovered at the shelter, snug in a towel-lined box with a name tag that read Sugar, Crumbs sat beneath a park bench watching a boy cry beside a swing set. Too young to explain why his mom didn't show up, too small to know where she went, and Crumbs approached slowly, lying at the boy's feet, letting him rest a hand on his head without flinching. And they stayed that way for an hour, silent. Two creatures who didn't know each other's language, but understood everything just the same. Across the city, Riley was retracing old paths, checking the bakery 3 times. Staring at the empty sidewalk like it had betrayed her, she saw the viral post only when a coworker showed her screen tilted with wide eyes, saying, "Isn't this your dog? The one you feed?" And Riley gasped, not because she saw him, but because she realized everyone else could now too. Her Crumbs, the quiet guardian of her mornings, was now a symbol, a story, a miracle. But all she wanted was to see him again, to tell him she missed him, that she finally started writing again because of him, that she dreamed of illustrating a book called Crumbs Window with watercolor bread and little paw prints on each page. She stayed up all night writing the first draft. Tear-stained pages covered in soft pencil lines, and when the morning came, she didn't go to work. She went to the bakery and waited, holding a warm slice of baguette in her hand like a prayer. But the sidewalk stayed empty, and the glass never fogged with nose prints. And the crowd of fans who came hoping to see the hero dog left disappointed, except one, a girl with freckles and a cast on her leg, who sat down beside Riley and asked softly, "Do you think he's magic?" And Riley smiled, really smiled, and said, "I think he just listens better than the rest of us." And in that moment, across the street, from behind a parked delivery van, Crumbs watched, not because he was afraid, but because sometimes the best way to protect something is to love it from a distance. But even he didn't know what was about to happen next. How one moment, one street corner, one heartbeat would change everything again, and this time someone wouldn't make it unless Crumbs did something no one expected. The day started like any other, with streetlights blinking off one by one and delivery trucks rumbling down narrow lanes as the city yawned itself awake. But somewhere between the smell of toasted bagels and the creak of apartment windows opening to let in the cool air, something shifted, something small, something silent, something that would have gone unnoticed by anyone not paying attention. But Crumbs noticed, he always noticed, because even though he didn't speak, didn't beg, didn't bark, he listened, the way only dogs do, not just with ears but with their whole being. And this morning, as he stood at the corner near 3rd and Halden nose, twitching at the breeze that carried 100 stories, he heard it, not a sound exactly, but a silence, a missing piece in the rhythm of things. A heartbeat gone faint, a scent gone sour, and he turned, sharp and sure, as if pulled by a thread only he could feel, weaving through alleys, crossing streets with practiced grace until he reached the building, tall, brick, faceless, the kind you walk past 100 times and never see. But Crumbs stopped, stared up at the 4th-floor window where the curtain fluttered just once and then stilled. And that's when he ran, not walked, ran, pause, pounding against pavement, across the street, into the alley. Leaping over a discarded chair and squeezing through a half-open gate, his chest heaving, breath steady, ears locked on the door that led into the building's back stairwell. He waited, watched, and then the door creaked open, just enough, just wide enough for a single body to stumble out and collapse. Riley's neighbor, an older woman named Mrs. Darnell, barely conscious, one hand clutching her chest, the other gripping the doorframe as if it were the only thing anchoring her to this world. She had been alone, too proud to call for help, too scared to admit the pain in her chest had started days ago, and this morning it had become unbearable. And if Crumbs hadn't been there, hadn't heard what wasn't said, she would have died behind that door. But instead he barked once, sharp, urgent, the kind of bark that slices through noise and makes people turn, and turn they did. A jogger on the far sidewalk paused, looked over, saw the dog barking frantically, and then saw her. The old woman crumpled on the steps, eyes wide with fear and pain, and within seconds he was dialing 911, shouting to someone across the street to help. A small crowd gathered, but Crumbs never left her side. He lay down beside Mrs. Darnell, pressing his body against hers, offering his warmth, his presence, his silent promise that she wasn't alone, that he would not leave, not now, not until. Help came, and when the ambulance arrived and the MTS asked, "How did you find her?" the jogger pointed to Crumbs and said, "He did." No one questioned it. Not anymore, because by now, people in the neighborhood knew the golden retriever with the eyes full of sorrow and the heart full of lightning. Knew that wherever he showed up, something was about to be saved, and Riley, she was home, just across the street. Standing by her window, watching, mouth open, heart pounding, tears on her cheeks as she whispered, "It's him," and rushed down the stairs, barefoot. Forgetting everything, bursting through the door and calling Crumbs. Crumbs. And for the first time in days he turned, really turned, eyes locking with hers, and she dropped to her knees, arms wide, and he ran to her. Full speed, leaping into her arms with a weight that knocked her back onto the pavement. Both of them tangled in a heap of fur and laughter and sobs. And the whole street paused for a breath, as if watching a scene too pure for the world to ruin. Phones captured it, hearts held it, and Riley whispered into his ear, "I missed you so much," and Crumbs just leaned in closer, as if to say, "I never left." The EMTs loaded Mrs. Darnell into the ambulance, and someone said she'd be okay, that they got to her just in time, and the jogger knelt down beside Riley and asked, "Is he yours?" And she smiled through tears and said, "I don't think anyone owns him, but maybe he belongs to all of us." And Crumbs wagged his tail once, as if agreeing, but even as they reunited, even as she carried him inside and dried his fur and fed him warm broth and laid beside him on the living room rug, while the city hummed outside, Crumbs' ears twitched, always listening, always waiting, because something else was coming, something darker, something colder, a storm that no weather app had predicted, something that would test everything he was and everything Riley had begun to believe. Because miracles aren't just stories, they're choices. It's moments when someone steps forward instead of looking away, when a dog who once begged for crumbs becomes the reason someone survives. And as night fell and the city blinked with lights, a siren wailed from far away, and Crumbs lifted his head, alert, his eyes fixed not on the past, but on the road ahead. Because deep in his chest he knew he wasn't done yet, and the next person who needed him wouldn't have a second chance without him. The wind had changed, not just the kind that moves leaves or cools sidewalks, but the kind that whispers before a storm, kind that tightens the air around you and makes you check the sky even when it looks clear, and Crumbs felt it before. Anyone else? Lying beside Riley as she scribbled in her notebook, her fingers smudged with charcoal and her toes tucked under his warm belly, the windows open just enough for the curtains to flutter. But his ears twitched, his breath slowed, and he stood up, not startled, but certain, walking to the window, staring down at the street like it had just spoken his name. And Riley looked up, smiling. "What is it, boy?" But he didn't respond, didn't wag his tail, just kept watching, till she followed his gaze and noticed it too. The street was empty, too empty. No chatter, no music from the deli, No dogs barking across balconies. Only stillness. The kind that creeps into you, makes your stomach not for reasons you can't explain. And that's when the first boom rolled across the sky. Not thunder exactly, but something heavier, distant. And then the first raindrop hit the window, fat and slow, followed by another and another. And within minutes, the sky cracked open like an old wound, spilling cold, furious rain onto the city, slamming rooftops and flooding gutters. The kind of storm that drowns sound and bends trees and forces even the bravest indoors. Riley rushed to close the windows, heart racing. Flashbacks to childhood nights when storms meant candles and her father's old radio, but Crumbs didn't move, not away from the door, not when thunder cracked so loud it rattled picture frames. He stood, poised, watching the handle like he expected it to turn on its own. And then it happened. A scream, faint, carried by the wind and swallowed. By rain? But Crumbs heard it, his whole body stiffening, turning toward Riley with a look so fierce it made her drop her notebook. And before she could ask what was wrong, he pawed the door once, twice, urgently, and she knew he had to go. "Are you serious?" she whispered, staring at the storm, at the streets now turned to rivers. Now? "It's dangerous out there," but he barked, low, sharp, insistent, and something in her broke. The way it does when you know you have to let go, even if it terrifies you. She opened the door, fell to her knees. "Hugged him tight, come back to me," she whispered, and Crumbs licked her cheek. Then vanished into the storm, swallowed by rain and wind, his golden coat slick against the night. Feet splashing through puddles, nose to the ground, chasing. A sound that no one else could follow, a sound that wasn't just pain, but desperation. He ran 4 blocks, past closed shops and shuttered windows, past flickering streetlights and flooded corners, until he reached it, the underpass near Willow and Ninth, where water now rushed like a shallow river and trash floated like lost memories. And there, clinging to a bench leg, was a girl, maybe 8 or 9, soaked to the bone, arms wrapped around a small, whimpering puppy, her ankle twisted, face streaked with tears and rain. Her lips moving, but her voice too soft to rise above the storm. She had wandered from the shelter nearby. Following the sound of barking she thought was her lost dog, and then the rain came, and she couldn't find her way back, and now here she was, alone, invisible, until Crumbs arrived, standing tall at the edge of the water, barking once, sharp, loud, drawing her eyes, and when she saw him, she sobbed, "Help me," and Crumbs, without a second of hesitation, plunged into the floodwater, chest deep, his legs fighting the current as he pushed toward her. Step by step, until he reached the bench, and she reached out, grabbing the loose leash around his neck like a lifeline, and Crumbs turned, pulling her inch by inch toward the slope where water met sidewalk, using all his strength, slipping once, but never giving up, until they both collapsed on dry ground, soaked and shivering. And just as the girl began to faint from cold and fear, headlights cut through the rain, a rescue van, slowing, doors flying open, and volunteers rushing toward the shape of the golden retriever and the child he saved. Blankets, warm lights, voices saying she's okay. "We've got her," and "How did you even find her?" But Crumbs didn't hear any of it, his body giving in now, shaking from exhaustion, legs buckling, and someone shouted, "Get the dog too!" And they carried him in, wrapped tight in a towel, placing him beside the girl, and for a brief moment, their hands touched hers, small and trembling, his paw resting beside it. And the entire van fell silent, watching the quiet miracle unfold. Back at Riley's apartment, the phone rang. And when she answered, breathless, a woman said, "Ma'am, do you have a golden retriever named Crumbs?" And Riley froze, heart in her throat. "Yes," she whispered, and the woman said, "He saved a child tonight. He's here, and he's alive." And Riley fell to her knees again, this time in gratitude, whispering thank you to no one and everyone, and rushed into the night to find him, her hands still trembling from fear, her heart racing from love. And across the city, as the storm began to ease, people read the update on their phones, the story spreading like dawn. A stray dog who once begged for crumbs, now saving lives in the middle of a flood, not once, Not twice, but again and again. And even those who didn't believe in miracles couldn't look away, because sometimes heroes don't wear capes. They wear wet fur and carry silence like armor. And they show up when the world forgets how to listen. And as Riley entered the clinic, breath catching as she saw him, soaked, tired, eyes barely open, she ran to him, collapsing onto the floor beside his stretcher, whispering, "You." Came back in Crumbs, despite the weight in his body and the cold in his bones. Wagged his tail, once, just once, and that was enough. 'Cause sometimes a tail wag is the loudest thank you the world will ever hear. The clinic was quiet now, the kind of quiet that doesn't feel empty, but sacred. As if the walls themselves were holding their breath, Riley sat curled beside Crumbs, her hand resting gently on his chest, counting each rise and fall like a prayer. The storm had passed. The girl had been reunited with her mother. The puppy she'd clutched was warm and dry in the next room, and volunteers moved softly around them, bringing fresh towels, murmuring updates. But Riley only saw him, her dog, her miracle, not bought, not bred, not even hers in the traditional sense. But somehow entirely hers all the same. His fur smelled of rain and alleyways, and something she could only describe as memory. And when his eyes finally opened, just a little, just enough to meet hers, she choked on her own relief, whispering, "You're okay, you're okay." Over and over, like she was trying to convince the universe not to take him away. The vet, a kind older woman with silver hair pulled back tight, knelt beside them and smiled. "He's strong, stronger than I've seen in a long time. He just needs rest." And Riley, tears spilling silently, leaned down and pressed her forehead to his, whispering, "I'll never let you go again." And Crumbs, with effort, licked her hand once and drifted back to sleep. The next few days passed in gentle slowness, like the world had agreed to. Pause until he was better. Visitors came, some who had read about him online, some who had seen him with the kitten, or at the underpass, or by the bakery window. People brought bread and blankets. Children drew pictures of golden retrievers with superhero capes. The shelter received so many calls they had to hire an extra staff member just to handle the inquiries. And through it all, Crumbs rested, healing slowly, until one morning he stood, walked to the door, and looked back at Riley with a quiet urgency she recognized instantly. "You ready?" she asked, and he wagged his tail, just once. And so they stepped out into the morning sun together, the sidewalk still glistening from the night's rain, the bakery across the street opening its shutters and the smell of fresh bread rising. Into the sky like music, Crumbs walked ahead slowly, pausing at the window he once sat before day after day. Staring at the sourdough that had somehow started it all, Riley knelt beside him, smiling. "Looks different now, doesn't it?" And inside, the baker, the same one who once shook his head at a stray on the sidewalk, stepped out, holding a small wrapped loaf, bending down and placing it gently in front of him. "For you," he said, voice thick for everything. And Crumbs looked up, not with hunger, but with something softer, like understanding, and took it gently in his mouth before setting it beside Riley, as if to say, "This is for you too." The next weeks unfolded like a story that had already been written. Crumbs was officially adopted, not just by Riley, but by the entire block. The bakery started a Crumbs fund, collecting donations for animals in need. The girl he saved visited every Sunday, reading aloud to him from picture books she now wrote with Riley's help. Crumbs the Guardian became their first. Title, illustrated by Riley in watercolor, just like she'd always dreamed. The bakery hosted a launch party where Crumbs wore a tiny boatie and sat beside the signing table. Kids lined up to pet him and whisper secrets in his ear. The kitten Sugar was adopted by the vet herself, and sometimes the two would nap beside each other in sunlit corners during lazy afternoons. And Riley, once tired, once invisible, was now writing daily, her apartment filled with post-it notes and sketches and laughter, but still, every morning, just before the city woke, she and Crumbs would walk to the window, just to sit, just to remember, because some things shouldn't be forgotten. A dog who waited, a girl who listened, and a moment that changed everything. And though they never spoke of it, they both knew the miracle wasn't in the rescue. It was in the noticing, in the staying. In the way a dog who once begged for crumbs somehow gave people back the pieces of themselves they didn't know were missing. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the ones we pass by are the ones who carry the magic. Not loud, not obvious, but quiet, patient, waiting for the right moment to make us believe again. So the next time you walk past a stray, or someone sitting, alone, or a silence that feels too heavy, remember Crumbs. Remember how he never barked for attention. He never asked for anything, but gave everything. And if you've ever had a dog who looked at you like you were their whole world, even on the days you didn't feel like much at all, this story is for you. And for them, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? And what time is it over there? Is your dog sitting next to you right now? Are they sleeping, wagging their tail, or maybe just listening the way Crumbs did? Because sometimes the quiet ones change the world. One crumb at a time.